hear the microphone's on, so we'll keep rolling here. Thanks everyone for stopping by. My name is Richard Wilson. I'm Primary Focus Lead, Genetic Regulation at Astellas, where I have oversight of our AAV gene therapy portfolio. Importantly, I'm also an ARM board member, and I feel duty-bound to point out, as Tim Hunt did this morning, if you're not a member, please consider it. The work that is being done by ARM right now is critically important to help us go through this moment as we think about changes in the US, what we've heard earlier today around the joint clinical assessment, which we know is incredibly important to help us bring the kinds of benefits we know that these therapies can deliver to patients in need, which I think is a great segue to today's discussion. It's my pleasure to have Dr. Jim Wilson join me on stage. He probably needs no introduction, but I will give a brief one regardless. Jim has been in the gene therapy field for over 40 years, over 30 of those at UPenn, where he has set up one of the first and largest academic gene therapy centers, which I think, as most people know, has been incredibly productive, leading to, amongst other things, 3 approved FDA products, and over 40 active clinical development programs, so a really impressive track record. And I think the topic for today is, why are we moving on? What's next here in the career of Jim Wilson, and why is now such an important moment to think about that next step? So let me turn the microphone over to you, Jim, and say, tell us about the move from UPenn. Why after 30 years the change today?
Sure. So my microphone is on. I think everyone can hear me. Great, thank you. First of all, it's great to be here, and a little embarrassing to talk about myself, but it's what we've been asked to do. And I do think there are some lessons learned as you track my career, because it basically follows the trajectory of the field. So I think that would be useful. What you're referring to is October of most recent October, that I decided to leave the University of Pennsylvania and start a company called GEMMABio, a gene therapy rare disease company. And before I discuss why we made that decision, maybe another way to think about it is, why did I stay in the academy for so long? Because it has its own particular challenges. And as you follow the work from my lab, it was really based on developing the enabling gene delivery technology that occurred at the turn of the century, and an exquisite focus on safety and understanding mechanisms of safety. Along those decades, I had an opportunity to lead Penn and take on major leadership roles in pharma or biotech. But I felt that the field had to ferment a bit more, that there needed to be room for explanation and exploration. And I felt that at Penn, considering the latitude that leadership at Penn allowed me to do, that we could. That's not to say that we weren't doing everything we could to try to develop products, because my training is actually as a physician and a scientist and as a clinical geneticist. So I came to this because of the unmet need in genetic diseases. And during that time, the last 12 years, started 8 different companies, and those companies raised money, and we put a lot of products into the clinic with a high amount of success. So I sort of extent mission accomplished. But what became clear over the last few years was that the enthusiasm that we saw for rare disease gene therapies over the last decade or so was diminishing. And not only was diminishing, it sort of went into full-on retreat. And that had to do with programs that we conceived of, we developed, we manufactured, we filed the INDs that were in clinical trials. And those programs were being parked. And so the question I asked myself, I asked leadership at Penn, and then asked our team, do we understand why it is that our programs that we thought were good programs, and some of them had remarkable clinical success, weren't progressing into later stage clinical development and to the commercial commercial side of the companies. Can we understand that? And if so, what can we do about it, basically? And the Penn leadership, to their credit, was completely open, because I was the largest extramural source of extramural funding, tech transfer revenue significant. So it wasn't based totally on a financial decision on Penn's part. But really, our mission is to get our discoveries out to patients. And so we felt that we did have a plan forward, that we thought we could build a company that would be successful commercially. And in fact, if we succeed, and we may or may not, we're sure going to try, may provide some leadership to others that there is a path forward in these genome editing, gene therapy, one-time treatments in rare diseases. So when you talk about rare diseases, clearly, if it's not too rare, the market will support that. Zolgensma, the Sarepta product, incidence around 4 to 5 per 100,000. That's the bar that I think would lead to successful commercial products. But 89% of genetic diseases that are rare fall below that line. And so we asked the question, is it possible in that space, which is the majority of the space, can we develop a successful business? And so we left Penn, brought our intellectual property, brought our staff, subleased our space, actually didn't even move, but took on a new role, and our team followed.
Fascinating. It's, I'm sure it's been interesting to kind of make that leap at this moment, as you said. I know when we met and had the pre-call, you had some thoughts as well on the concept of the great abandonment. And, you don't necessarily sign up to that concept.
No. So in this setting of programs being terminated or parked, primarily rarer diseases, because when things get difficult from a financial standpoint, it's often the rarer diseases that are put aside. And each time that occurs, there's a whole community of patients, their families and friends and supporters and healthcare providers that are affected by that. So, and the pace which that occurred and the extent to which it occurred led to some colleagues, I think from UMass, wrote an editorial about the great abandonment. And I don't necessarily think anyone really wants to abandon anyone. It's kind of a negative term. But as I followed my career, this gene therapy and genome editing is a classic example of an emerging disruptive technology. There's a whole scholarship around this that I've learned from my colleagues at the Wharton School. But it starts with a rapid ascent in support of an emerging new disruptive technology, coined irrational exuberance. So we really don't know much about it, but it can do anything in our eyes and in the eyes of our supporters. We experienced irrational exuberance in the late 90s, and then it blew up. I think that the dot-com kind of brought us down. There was Targeted Genetics, Avogen, a number of sort of early gene therapy companies. Then we went into a decade of, we actually couldn't even say we were working on gene therapy. We said we were working on regenerative medicine. But that was a great opportunity in the typical sort of trajectory of an emerging technology to take a more sober view of what the technology can do. And without the lights and the promise and the press associated with gene therapy at the end of the last century, we could bunker down and do science. That's when we discovered that there are endogenous AAVs, different serotypes. And then this syncs with the markets and sort of global economic issues, which aren't. So we were subterranean, did a lot of science. A few of us, we call ourselves renegades, continue to work in the space. And then there was a recession, 2008. But then following the recession, all of a sudden there was this uptick in interest in gene therapy. And I work in AAV, in vivo gene therapy. And I remember as quickly as it crashed, it just came back. And I kept saying, do you really want to invest in that program? Do you really want to invest in that technology or the application of that technology? And but the money came in, so, let's just go with it. And then it actually even accelerated, pre-COVID, when it was very frothy. I remember I took a company public. I started the company. Within a year, we took it public. We didn't even have an IND. And soon after it was public, it was worth $2 billion. I'd probably call that, I don't know what you call it, irrational exuberance, maybe. but anyway, we were able to finance the company. We were able to progress the program. So we're in a cycle. And there's a correction. That's what the economists call it. And there always is a correction. And, at the end of 2018, 2019, it was just evaluations were way, way too high. But there's something different. That there's more than a correction. There's an overcorrection. And that gene therapy, that the retreat and the decreased support from the industry, pharmaceutical industry and investors, sort of is, I think, is exaggerated over what I believe it should be. And we always have swings, but this is what worried us, was what led, not to the cycles. So there was no one abandoning, literally, consciously anyone. It was just following the cycles of the market and the trajectory of an emerging technology. I think finally we had to face the music, which I knew we were going to have to. That the business model around one and done, one-time interventions, where the diseases are rare, is going to be challenging. And I think we face that music. And that's where when looking at the reality of that and some examples where there were failures from a commercial standpoint, and I coin this now, irrational reticence, not abandonment. We'll just say reticence, which means come back. So that's where we are, and we, the aggregate we, and this is why it's so wonderful to be with all of you, because to a certain extent you're a believer. We have to work together to change that reticence into support. Not irrational support, but just rational support.
Yeah, it's so well said. I think whoever has royalties on the Gartner hype cycle must be very rich by now. But hopefully we're going through a trough of disillusionment to a plateau of enlightenment. The one thing that I thought was really interesting when news broke of you starting GEMMABio was the intention to really start a company that was commercial focused. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as you've exemplified, the idea of starting a company from an academic institution is not new. But going about building a commercial focused company feels quite different. How did you think about going about that?
Well, that was part of that period of about a year and a half where we were asking the question, why the reticence? Listen to every investor I pitched, to every word they said. Didn't always agree with it, accepted it, thanked them, but should try to understand what was leading to this lack of support. And so we came to a point where we feel that there is a model for developing rare disease one and done gene therapy companies that can be successful from a business standpoint. And so I'll sort of share with you at a high level what those elements are. but it's not the traditional playbook. The traditional playbook, academy makes a discovery, maybe there's a founder, licensing, biotech, investment, catalyst, step up, liquidity, M&A, licensing. That has served us well. There's no question. That playbook clearly isn't working right now. So a couple things. One is you got to get the science right. And that may seem obvious, but science isn't always clear. And that's one thing with 40 years when we make a decision about getting behind a program and a technology, we have the privilege of experience. The second is platforms. We heard about platforms early on, and we think that it is really essential in the foundation of a company to consider your products in the setting of platforms. Now, the one thing that served us well in this retreat, abandonment, and whatever, is we could take a step back and we could be the maestro of a consolidation play. So in other words, we could build our platforms through licensing, free or pennies on the dollar, which we could not have done in 2018. So the way that I think about a platform is you change nothing, and the only thing you change is the gene of interest. Now, because we had sort of like Johnny Appleseed seeded many companies and had a lot of programs, it was easier for us to consolidate and to acquire and to license in programs where I know we kept the capsid the same. We kept the manufacturing the same. We'll say for our CNS programs, the route of administration the same, that the dose that we used was the same, that the KOLs we interacted with were the same, patient advocacy groups that we interacted were the same. And as we began to aggregate and consolidate, for example, our CNS platform, we had one program that was ready for a BLA, I believed, based on feedback from FDA. So the platform and other clinical stage programs, the platform was de-risked, essentially. And just can we lean into that, and what kind of advantage can we realize as a result of having a de-risked platform? Well, it's all about commercializing these products, spending as little money as you can. That's what it's all about. I get it. But if you, in the setting of that platform, less demands on capital, that the sequential probability of success is going to be much greater. Timelines will be faster. So platform, and we have, in GEMMABio, we have our CNS platform, which is based on an intracellular magnet delivery of a clade-F variant for storage diseases and motor neuropathies. The next element that we really believe is important for us now, and I would suggest others think about this as well, if you're interested in commercial, unmet need. Unmet need, we're still early. ARM's got a lot of work to do. We're only at the beginning of this journey. And it's very clear that unmet need is important because you have fewer headwinds, they become tailwinds. But where I was surprised, never thought I'd see this, is gene therapy products being approved, being priced, and not prescribed. And that's the hemophilia programs. Unmet need. Now, maybe in certain regions, but unmet need, the potential for a transformative effect where, wow, that worked. That patient should not survive, now they survive. No problem, less problem with pricing. And in rare diseases, in which there is essentially no competition, this is where I think, from a commercial standpoint, it's very different. If you're the only game in town, which in rare diseases we are because of the retreat, and you have a transformative effect, you don't have to worry about have to worry about market share. You are the market. In sales and marketing, the patients come to you through social media and through advocacy groups. So, so unmet need is absolutely critical for us right now. And then once we gain experience, we can then move into other applications in which the unmet need is less. But then finally, the question that you asked, which I was asked frequently, so you're going to be a commercial company? So what's your background in what's your budget for sales and marketing? I tell them it's zero. I say, yeah, that academic doesn't know what they're doing. But what we have and what I have is a network, international network of colleagues in these disease areas and academic health centers where I know the CEOs, I know the leadership of the departments, I know the clinicians, I know the advocacy groups. And what we've been able to do, because we prosecute the platform with shared diseases, is develop a network of centers of excellence where patients go for their treatments, to participate in the studies, and we would envision to go for their treatments. And I think for many of these gene therapy programs, we're going to want them done in centers of excellence. I'll even give you an example. Could be a procedure. The cisterna magna injection or intraparenchymal injection. But even for Duchenne's, I would argue that we need to be careful. That not every, with the current safety profile of these products, that they really can't be done in any neuromuscular center, that they have to understand how to follow the patients and track the patients. So centers of excellence. And one thing that's different about our approach, which is an in vivo delivery, it's usually about 2 days or so, 2 to 3 days, as opposed to an ex vivo delivery, where it's 6 to 8 weeks in the intensive care, where it's harder, the burden on the family is much more challenging, where you have to relocate the family, and God bless those that are trying to do it and trying to support those families. But I do think this centers of excellence model is feasible. And if we don't pull it off, we're going to fail. Because we're not going to rely on the pharmaceutical industry to take this on. This is just not their model, and it's not large enough. Now then the question, the final frontier, because I think we've passed through every gate that I could think of, is there going to be sufficient market, sufficient sales to justify building that enterprise, operating that enterprise? And there, the notion of a platform helps. So our lead 3 programs are leukodystrophies. One's BLA ready, the other are clinical stage. Each of them is probably about 150 million. And in the aggregate, if we could put together a $500 million, and then there's MPS 3A, 3B, Canavan, CLN1, CLN2. I mean, we don't have the capital for that, but then I do think there are that you could have sufficient sales, to justify that.
No, it's a great story. I've got to say, I think many of us who are trying to think about how you can reinvent that model within an existing company wrestle with those same questions. I think at some future meeting, there's an interesting panel to be put together on that topic. But from the outside perspective, that sounds like it makes really strong logical sense. I'm also curious to maybe ask about the inside perspective. Now Jim Wilson as CEO, you described how you've brought a lot of the folks along. You've tacked a new name on the door. What do you need to do to help run the company in a way that makes the employees feel like they're working for a commercial stage company? Is there something different about how you approach leading the organization or how you think about staffing?
Well, clearly there are certain experiences that we need to bring in. Finance, we brought in Chief Medical Officer. We're currently have some outstanding candidates for CFO. From commercial, we brought in a really great consultant who just has enormous experience and And that was the one that worried me the most, because if you bring in the wrong commercial person, they're going to tell you, well, this is the way we're going to do it. We're not going to succeed. But with that said, we operated an organization. We had 40 active programs. We put out 18 INDs, 17 of which were successful. We had 404 people, and a budget of about 120 million, all off grants and contracts. So we know about alliance management, we know about project management, we know about reg affairs, we know about CMC, we do that work. I was responsible for raising the money back then. It hasn't changed. Back in the academy, all you do is raise money for your work. You pretty much know what the rules are, even though you don't like them. Peer review, and all I do is raise money now anyway, and all I'll be doing is raising money. We have many more options for capital. The thing that's different is the rules seem to change like every quarter, that this is now investable and this isn't investable. So it isn't, but really an outstanding people at the core are committed to patients and know how to work hard. So I would also point out that in order to build that enterprise within an Ivy League institution had its challenges. Now we have our own challenges now, but we don't have sort of trying to operate within an academic environment.
Very, a fascinating situation. I've got to say the other thing that, listening to how you've described the move and the setup of GEMMABio, it's fundamentally, I think, a positive story. Mm-hmm. It's a story about hope. And it strikes me very much as we think about, the global situation we're in, we have to lead from a position of positivity and hope. I'm curious, as we kind of think about closing out the session, what thoughts or messages you have for other leaders in cell and gene today?
Well, first of all, genetic diseases and rare diseases are relevant in any country, in any geography. We've always approached our work in rare diseases globally, absolutely. And there's a disproportionate burden of genetic diseases ex-US because of consanguinity in the Middle East, founder effects in Latin America. So think about your world globally. We've done a lot of work in Latin America, maybe a point where we can talk about at another time, partnered with the Ministry of Health in Brazil for $100 million non-dilutive support in return for partnering with that organization. The Ministry of Health, which is not only Anvisa that does the health authority, but CMED that prices, and Conitec, which is a public health system. That's all integrated in one sort of discussion. And tonight I'm heading to the Middle East. Huge burden of genetic diseases there. So if we think about our world globally, it increases market opportunities, but it creates opportunities for research science and financing. If I just stayed in my office and kept the Rolodex with venture capital, we probably wouldn't succeed. Mm-hmm. Although venture capital, in some believers, are critical and core to what we do. They validate what we do. But I love the fact that we can operate globally. I mean, it enriches our lives. And at the core, whenever I go to visit, wherever it is, I ask, can I go to a local hospital and can I meet the clinician? And they bring me into the clinic. And you walk into that room, there's a parent or parents with a child with a genetic disease. That doesn't change based on where you live. That's fundamental and core to what we need to achieve. So I am super excited about where we are, where the field is. The science continues to just astound me. But we as a community need to work together in a productive way. It's about, we talk about innovation. A better capsid is going to help, better manufacturing, but innovation in a business sense is going to be what's going to change this. And I think many people are up for it. Sometimes you're in organizations that make it more difficult than others. But I'm pretty sure that anyone that's committed to cell and gene therapy and committed to rare disease patients would do everything they could if given the chance. And if we can then unleash that excitement and that energy, which we will, which I'm sure we will. In 5 years, I'll tell you what, someone asked me, what do you think things are going to be like in 5 years? We're going to make a lot of success. Hopefully we're successful. But the one thing that does concern me, at least in genetic diseases, is we're going from a period when I was a clinician where we had no treatments. That's why I got involved in the field. Now we're going to have disease-modifying therapies, and we're going to have more of them. But as a consequence of that, I'm afraid we're going to exacerbate healthcare disparities. If there aren't any, there's no healthcare disparity. But when there are, and then like working with the Ministry of Health to do everything we can when we're successful to make sure that they're distributed and accessible to those in Latin America in a way that supports the business objectives and doesn't compromise shareholder value. That I think that's something that I would encourage all of us to think about as you think about your programs. Build on your success, but we do have to worry about healthcare disparity, and these high costs are impossible. But in many places, but technology is going to bring those costs down. There's absolutely no question. The programs that are in the clinic now are legacy programs that are in commercial. And the follow-on applications, like RGD capsids for heart and muscle that are 30-fold more efficient, rather than 250,000 a dose, it could be 15 per dose. Now, that doesn't mean always translate to substantial decrease in cost, but if you proceed forward in which you're more likely to succeed than fail, I do think that we can be successful and have more affordable prices. So that's that would be my final hope.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for taking the time to share those thoughts and your experiences with us. I personally am very much looking forward to seeing you when you come back to talk about your first commercial success. In the meantime, please join me in thanking Dr. Wilson for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.